friends, welcome to another episode of Work, Life, Play, where we want it all. And back in the day in 2012, when I first started podcasting, it was super rare. And for many of you that listen to podcast networks, and it's so polished and so perfect, it's just like watching cable TV. But back in the beginning, it was more like John Connor from the Terminator series broadcasting, kind of at this ruckus making. If you had a microphone in a closet you could record in and you had something to say, then you could, transmit it off into the matrix. So I have stayed with that same spirit largely from the beginning, a very hopefully polished where necessary, and rough and authentic where real. I think one of the greatest tragedies of our culture today is how much polish and perfection there is that creates a veneer in such a way that it feels unobtainable. And it creates and reinforces an idea of us and them. The people over there, them, the big names, the famous folk, whatever it may be. And then there's us over here. Well, very often what I find is the way we can close that gap is we can have real conversations in a real way that is helpful, but we just skip all that veneer and polish, and we just get right down into the grit of it and keep it real. So my friend Ryan Miller, author, fellow brother in the cause for things that are real, he wrote a new book. It's called Insipid, and it's a fictional story. And what I think is really fascinating about it is there's this quote I watched from a movie called The Usual Suspects, and Kevin Spacey's character, he quotes in the movie saying, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he did not exist." And I find that to be true. I find that to be very true, that there is such a discussion and dialogue around what is good in the world or light. And we don't talk a lot about the darkness. There's a lot more talking about the darkness these days in our culture, of the clashes of culture, the clashes of social class and lack of equity for our brothers and sisters on the planet. But I think what we don't often talk about is we go further and talk about what sits in the shadows. What is sitting in the shadows that's driving a lot of this? And are the characters in the story that are out of view? So when we're going to talk today, Ryan and I, about his new book and these questions about good and evil, and what is real and what is not, what is dark and what is bright, and what is happening in the light and what is happening in the shadows. So he writes about a character named Seth who craves and wants more life, but the journey he goes on to try and find it, and what stands in his way that comes out of the shadows and the stories that live in the shadows, I think you'll enjoy. Friends, this is good for us. And keep going. You can do this. All right, Ryan Miller, welcome back to Work, Life, Play. Tell me about Seth, the character that your book is about.
Well, Seth is a pastor who is pretty much burned out and smoked out on his faith. You could say he was leaning towards losing hope in all of it, almost atheist level, marriage problems, basically kind of a life, just a wrecked life. Pastor for many years. I enjoyed it immensely. I was never Seth. A lot of people have read the book and who know me and accuse me of being Seth, which I have to always say I'm not. But of course, there's some similarities in us, maybe an exaggerated version of me. But Seth is a guy who is based off of a lot of pastors that I got to know and talk to, who basically, they're in the job for the money. And I don't mean that in a bad way, to make a lot of money. I mean for the security of buying groceries and taking care of their family and having a paycheck. So it's not something they necessarily would choose anymore, or they enjoy, or there's a lot of passion about. It's just a job. And that's Seth. I mean, at an extreme level.
Yeah. And you're saying in your journey, when you were a pastor, you met a number of other pastors that just stayed in the gig because that's what they needed to do to put food on the table?
Yeah. And I don't mean it with any judgment. Sure. I mean it truly.
Yeah. Plumbers do that, right? Consultants do that. Like, yeah, no stones to throw.
Exactly. I've done that. And it's, what else would I do? I'm in this job. How could I start over? I get a paycheck. It gives me some adrenaline rushes here and there. And, I'm doing the Lord's work, quote unquote. And so I'll just fight through it and get through it.
And I'm reading the back. I'm going to read this for the listeners. So when a stranger in a coffee shop offers him something extraordinary, he has to listen. Even if the oddly normal man claims to be a friendly demon, leading one of the most brilliant and successful cons of humanity to ever exist. The man may be crazy, but he knows secrets Seth has told to no one. He reveals a reality Seth has never experienced. So pick us up there in the story and tell us about it.
It's kind of a modern take on Screw Tape, I would say, a little edgier 2020 version. So this demon, we call him a shadow in the book. I just like the word shadow better, but a lot of people wouldn't know that for the back of the book. And that goes into our shadow side and our darker self and our societal shadows. And this shadow / demon comes into a burned out pastor who's in it for the money and says, listen, I know why your life's falling apart. I know why you have all these doubts. I know why you're where you're at. And I can explain all of it and hopefully in the end get you out of it, because I want out of it too. Because I've created this culture, for lack of a better word, that's got you stuck. And I understand it better than you do. And if you help me help you, we might both find a way out.
From your journey, that phrase of being stuck and wanting a way out, what were some of the ways that you wanted ways out?
I wanted a way out from a job I had before I was a pastor, and that was the classic, which you know very well and talk about very well. Got paid a pretty good amount of money, hated the job. I mean, I would come home just depressed, but didn't know where else to turn. So that's a very obvious one. I think a lot of people can relate to, is just that hamster on a wheel. But I think, again, it's been a long process, and this book was 8 or 9 years in the making, kind of the whole trajectory of me entering into the church world in a more official level and then leaving it. So I think there's a lot of ways we want out that we're not always aware of. Richard Rohr is one of my favorites. This quote is one of my favorites. It's the easy prophet is the one that comes to tell the enslaved that they can be free. But the much more difficult prophet is the one that comes to tell the free that they're actually enslaved. Mm. And to me, that's what this book at its best would be about, is that we're not free and we're enslaved. And there's something way better than this false, fake, surfacey freedom that we have. And that is the kind of stuck that I'm talking about. So there's a much deeper level stuck of just the things that drive me when I wake up in the morning, the things that make me go, the things that make me happy or not. And it's the much more subtle and, for that reason, dangerous stuff that I've found about my own life.
So that statement is, we're not free, and that this is for the free that are actually enslaved. So how are we not free?
I'll speak for myself, because it's always dangerous to start talking about.
I say you just go bold. Just
okay. All right. I'll go bold. I'll go bold. I think America is very stuck on getting to the top, getting ahead, getting more. Enough is a word that we don't have in our vocabulary. We say we do, but we don't. And I think, in the short, to say it succinctly as I can, we're settling for something so much less than is available. And I think tied to that is that we don't give evil enough credit. So, or the darkness or the shadow side, whatever you want to call it. And I think this book is, in a sense, trying to give evil more credit. I think when we think evil's dumb and just tempting us with the very simple things in life, we miss out on the very great things in life. They're tied together. So this is, in a sense, saying there's so much more to life. There's so much better. There's so much more freedom. There's so much leaving our attachments, leaving this pursuit of more. And evil is smart enough to make all of these things the thing that we're fighting our lives for. And it's not going to do it blatantly, because that's too clear to all of us. So it's going to do it subtly and covertly and in the most tempting of ways that even us who are very intelligent and profound and wise, quote unquote, think we're above and beyond.
Yeah. Amen. I'm reading, do you know the movie, The Usual Suspects? Remember that? I don't know what, 1990 something?
Yeah.
So one of my favorite lines, I just looked it up. Yeah. 1995, Usual Suspects, Kevin Spacey. The greatest trick we'll use here, the shadow, right? The shadow ever pulled, or darkness or evil or Satan or the devil or whoever, whatever phrase you might want to use, ever pulled, was convincing the world he didn't exist. So how is that true in this book? How is that true in your life?
I think the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that the devil is stupid. You know what I mean? It's almost like, oh yeah, of course there's evil, of course there's temptation, but it's not a
cartoon character with a cartoon tail and a pitchfork.
Yeah, or even, it's oh well, I'm not fill in the blank, so therefore I'm not evil. And again, there's spectrum of this, and it's so easy for us sometimes to resist the quote unquote devil that would be exactly what a devil would do. So in that sense, once we, oh yeah, I don't fall into that trap, then you're right. The devil, in a sense, doesn't exist in our own head, and then the devil has won. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's a gradation or levels of that, but I think most people would think some kind of evil or darkness exists. It's just how willing we are to say, like, yeah, that darkness can get me. That's the trick to me.
And I hear the question too is, maybe even a more helpful question for most to start with is, how is it in my freedom that I'm actually not free? And so on the perpetual treadmill of getting to the top, and the word enough not being in our vocabulary, that's not free.
No, right.
Right, because you're never done. It's up and to the right always. Right. And I remember hearing another conversation I had about this idea of enough and more, mm-hmm. that actually our addiction to more in the US and America is actually prominent. It's like whatever you did last month, last year, that's not enough. And this perpetual incessantness.
Yeah.
So tell us then how, as you pick apart the layers in that addiction, in that longing, walk us through some of the adventures, the low points of what Seth encounters in your book, and how that translates to your own experience.
Yeah. So there's a lot of areas this stuff shows up. I think religion is one of the first, and I don't want to start bashing religion. Again, I led a church for 10 years and it was amazing and I loved every minute of it and it was powerful. But I do think what we've done to religion in America has allowed us to settle for something much less than is available. So we've settled for a God that fits in a box that we bring our sacrifices to, and who gives us XYZ. And if we don't get XYZ, we haven't done enough sacrifices. It's so primitive and so surfacey and so much of a trap, even within religion. And you can see this manifest itself in all kinds of ways. I think our capitalist system is on more. I mean, if you look into capitalism, it's kind of at its root, a whole idea of you get capital to start your business, and then you need to keep kind of paying off that capital. And our economy functions on people needing next fall's new fashion and next spring's new colors and always more. And we're told even,
because the blue one that you bought last year is not any good anymore because there's a better one.
Right. And
Red
you know, politicians will be very open about this. Like, hey, we need you to keep shopping. We need to keep supporting your local businesses. We need you to keep more and more. And I am a local business. I get that. But that can be very much of a cage. I think there's a whole sexuality piece that's a huge cage in our society. And I'm not going to go on some purity movement here, because even that in itself can be a form of a cage. So Seth has kind of walked through these different aspects of his life. He has a lot of sexual baggage. So this demon kind of walks him through some of that. He has a lot of religious baggage. Obviously, he's a pastor. So this demon walks him through that. And he lives in America, and he's grown up in a society and a culture with constant programming saying, you're never enough, you never have enough, and you need more, and you people to get to the top if you have to. And this demon kind of walks him through that. And these are just forms of attachments. You know, it's kind of that question of what is happiness. And we have created happiness to be, when I get this thing or this person, I'm happy. But, you know, that's not true happiness. That's just an attachment. And so I hope Seth, by the end of it, finds that he's got what he needs, that this world is way bigger and more intriguing than he thought.
So on that riff that you just had, Ryan, about capitalism's a cage, sexuality can be a cage, religion can be a cage, growing up in America can be a cage that prohibits the freedom that we're made for, yet we don't view ourselves as enslaved. Reminds me a lot of The Matrix and Neo finding himself, you know, asking this question of what is the Matrix, and which is really this, you know, what's really going on here. Right. And I guess what I hear you saying is that you're choosing to take this bold move to name what you see that's going on here. What are the risks that we're running with our lives in believing that evil's not real and that we are actually free?
It might be really easy to come back to the ancient story, you know, God's people being enslaved in Egypt. Moses and the plagues, we've all kind of heard bits of this story. It's become part of our culture. Basically, this group of people, they had some promise of food and survival, but they were also beaten and had to work for a master. So they're freed in the story. They're out in the desert and they're free for the first time. In the desert, in that sense, freedom in that sense can be overwhelming. It's just the mystery of it, the unknown, the doubt, the uncertainty, the confusion. Where do we go next? And so they have this longing to go back to Egypt. And at least they say, we had our stew there. At least we had our meals every day. And it would be so interesting to talk to these people and say, why would you ever want to go back to that? And you can just imagine, well, look at this desert, man. I mean, what do we got out here? Well, you have freedom. You can do whatever you want. You can go wherever you want. God is with you. Yeah, but you know what? It's fine. I'd rather go back to the certainty of knowing I'm going to have soup tomorrow and all of the answers and all of the security in that sense. So I think that story represents so much of where we're at in life. And I think I grew up in a religion that promised me a lot of answers, a lot of security, a lot of codes, if you will. If you do this, this will happen. Include when I die, you'll go to heaven. I mean, we can go all the way to the end there. So that it was very much, this is how it works. You don't have to be religious to grow up this way. This is how America works. This is how nationalism works. This is how money works. This is how sexuality works. This is how these things work. And so true freedom is scary in a way. It's very unknown. It's mysterious. It's the uncertain. It's that true wilderness-like feeling. But having been there in bits of my life, I want more of it, and I am becoming addicted to that kind of freedom. And once you're there, you really start to realize what kind of a false freedom we've grown up in. But if I'm a demon and I want to control humanity, I mean, I'm going to promise them all the security in the world, all the answers in the world, all of the formulas in the world, and let them believe that they're free while they're living in a cage and potentially even building that cage themselves because they've become so addicted to it.
When I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, Ryan, I so appreciate this conversation, is I've been reading, and again, wherever your background is spiritually, just invite you into this ancient text. 2,000 years ago, there was this church of these Galatians, and this guy, Paul, wrote a letter to them about how to get along and how to actually find life and how to pay attention to where they might be building their own cages. I've been reading this passage almost every day for the last couple of months. And what this, as we're talking about what's it like to live in America these days, and I would just expand that to say to live in the world. So I'm going to read this passage about what he talked about 2,000 years ago. So it's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. It's repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotence to love or be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, and the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. I could go on.
It's great stuff.
Kind of sounds a little bit like the work of S, the shadow, huh?
Yeah, it does. And powerful words. I think, yeah, it's really hard. I think as a pastor / Christian / whatever I was, I could hear passages like that and put it all into a box, even as I was reading about the danger of boxes. So even as you're reading it to me, I can go into my old brain and be like, oh, yep, check. Oh, gosh, yeah, the poor people who do that, the poor people who do that, the poor people who do that.
Versus the question of how do I do that?
Yes.
That's the better question. That's what we're digging at. How do I do that? So joyless grabs of happiness, to me, is Amazon Prime it sometimes.
Right.
Like, I do that. I say, yes, buy now.
Buy now.
That's a joy. At times, it is a joyless grab for happiness.
It takes a lot of effort and work to really dive into ourselves and go down and drill in, because it's unsettling. You know, you get to a point, oh my gosh, wait, what is all of me? And what am I doing?
Yeah, so good. This second part of this passage here says, but what happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely.
Yep.
Sounds a lot more like freedom to me.
It does. Right. And it's, this has kind of become my to sum up my new worldview, I grew up believing that I had to get something or achieve something or do something or be something or find something. And I'm really leaning into this idea that it's all already here. Instead of believing that I need to go find God, no, God's already here. God's been here in every single instance. I don't go anywhere to find God. I can find pieces of life that uncover God or help me to see God or love or unity or peace or whatever it is. But the idea that I've got to keep pursuing is done. The only thing I need to pursue are the things that are blocking me or blinding me or imprisoning me in that sense. We've already got it. We're already there. We've just got to work on seeing it and believing it and experiencing it versus finding it. And maybe that's the greatest trick, is that you don't have it. You've got to go obtain it somewhere. And once we start on that path, maybe that's where we begin to become on the path of darkness, which is, again, very subtle and tricky and tempting. And that is, to me, why it makes more sense.
So good. So for us to find your book, where do we find it? And if we want to go deeper, what else are you up to in the world?
Well, it's on Amazon, and there's also insipidbook.com. You can find some stuff there. I love hearing feedback. I love hearing what people are getting from it. Putting a book out is like putting a kid out in the world, and there's no shield around it. It's just kind of, wow, here I am. This is truly me. I mean, this book is so me and my thoughts on the world that it's pretty vulnerable at times. And I'm really proud of it, and I love that I did it. And for all of that reason, I love hearing what people think about it. The worst thing, I don't know if this is the same for you, the worst thing is silence. When people have read it and say nothing. I would much rather, you know what, I just didn't get into it, or man, I didn't like it, or I was confused. That's so much easier to me personally than just the silence.
So the way we can love you, what love looks like to you, is let you know.
Yeah. And again, that all helps me for the future. You know, I want to write again someday, and there's no failure. There's just getting better. And the way I can get better is getting feedback for sure. So yeah, I love the feedback.
There's an interview I did with David Wilcox, the singer-songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he talked about with every new album that he released is that he viewed them as a flock of birds. Once the release happened, then those flock of birds take flight and go wherever they go. And he may or may not see any of them ever again.
That's good. Yeah.
And occasionally, some of them will fly back and deliver a message.
Ooh, that's good.
It was really good. I really helped a lot. So I think that in that case that we're birthing this thing, like you said, all of that being true, like a kid. And then like our kids, the older ones that go off and go to college, right? And kind of start to live their life, we're like, our role changes. And the gift is to actually hear about the work that we've done in the world and how it impacts people. And it also is, they're a flock of birds. So we'll see.
Again, how subtle this is. I wrote a book about being unattached, and I found myself being really attached to the book and people's response to it, and whether or not people are being silent or not. I mean, that's, again, that subtle stuff. Like, oh, I'll be so happy when somebody writes me that this book meant something to them. Or I'll be so content when. And it's, even in that, I've had to learn to let it go, let it be who it is, you know?
Which is where there's freedom, right?
Exactly.